I have no justification for what happened. Now that I'm back in the States, I've come to understand that Spain has the world's highest concentration of elevators, and that the apartment buildings they're most often found in tend to have poor maintenance. But that doesn't make me feel any better. My great aunt had invited us to Spain to visit the old family stomping grounds. But the elevator in question was actually the middle in a row of 3 at an unrelated apartment building. I'd slept in to deal with jet lag, and so I was alone when the taxi dropped me off. The family friend's party was at their place on the 4th floor, so I headed into the crowded building while smoothing my clothes and after briefly checking my hair in a mirror in the lobby. The pause made me miss the elevator on the left, so I waited with a few others. The middle elevator was the one that came for us. Alongside me there was a Spanish boy of about 4 or 5, an overweight British man, a gray-haired older woman with frail arms, 2 teenage boys, and a guy wearing glasses who was just a little bit older than me. I'll remember their faces for the rest of my life. I pressed 4. A series of hands pressed 5, 7, 11, and 15. I remember because the pattern of lights impressed itself upon my memory when the elevator first jolted roughly into motion. Upon seeing my discomfort, the overweight British man laughed kindly. "Fellow tourist, it's just how it is here. You get used to it." I nodded politely but continued to clutch the bar in the back. It was a little loose, prompting me to look around at the shaking walls as they bounced back and forth what looked to be a full inch from the corners they should have been locked into. The naked bodies of the bolts were visible at various moments, and I remember thinking that this elevator was basically a sparse cage with thin aluminum walls sticking on through nothing more than low-cost glue and premium-grade bullshit. I could even envision the building manager's face as he might hypothetically explain that the elevators were perfectly safe because nobody had ever been hurt in them before. Small consolation. Still gripping the bar, I watched as the elevator passed the 4th floor and continued on up. Had I pressed the button? I had. The 4 was still lit, but we'd gone right past it without even slowing down. Looking up, I tracked the floor indicator until it hit 6, and we jerked to an abrupt stop. The sound of something metal whirled and clanged beside us, and then below. We looked at each other for a moment before comprehending that something had fallen off of the elevator somewhere, and that we'd come to a stop when we shouldn't have. The old woman said something in Spanish to the guy my age, but he just pushed up his glasses and shook his head fearfully. "Brakes must have come on," the Brit said to me, already moving forward between the others to test the door. He slowed his step when the car shifted and swung slightly under us. The 2 teenage boys and the old woman screamed. The brakes hadn't come on. We were hanging free in the elevator shaft. Careful with his movements now, the Brit tried the doors. The outer layer opened a bit, but he couldn't get good leverage in the crowded car. Hesitantly, and very, very slowly, I let go of the bar in the back and crept forward to help him. I was no hero. I just wanted off, immediately. We managed to pull open the doors to find ourselves staring at white brick. Wherever we were, the floors above and below weren't visible at all. We were stuck. We tried our cell phones, but the old building was a heavy-set one made of brick and concrete, and none of us had any signal. The Brit lifted the elevator phone, but the wire beneath came with it, attached to nothing. I guess we can just stay here and yell as loud as we can? Somebody's bound to hear us." The car swung perceptibly back and forth as he shifted his stance, and he gripped the bare brick to slowly stabilize us as More terrified screams rang out. Nobody move, right? We didn't need to be told twice. For an unknown and exhausting span of minutes, we clung to anything we could, stayed absolutely still, and stared at each other's horrified faces as the Brit bellowed at the top of his lungs. No response was evident. When we decided to all yell together, one of us must have moved because the car began to swing, and the left wall of the car, that thin aluminum I'd silently insulted with its aging bolts and bouncing corners, suddenly screeched and fell away. We all froze while a crash of metal on concrete sounded, and then sounded again, and then echoed from far below. Our dangling cage now felt more like a swinging bucket trying to spill us out into the darkness. The left car was above us, so there weren't even any cables to mark the pitch-black elevator shaft that was waiting to swallow us up. Worse, the young Spanish boy that was 4 or 5 years old stood crying near the open edge as we swung back and forth. The old woman was the first to react. Quietly but insistently, she told the boy, "Ven aquí." He looked at her but was too scared to move. She tried again. "Ven acá." He didn't move, but cried something in Spanish. He says he's not supposed to talk to strangers. The Brit lifted his arm to reach, but then thought better of it. "I can't move or I'll swing the car more." He looked at us. "Is the boy alone here? Brothers?" The 2 teen boys widened their eyes. They didn't know him. "Grandmother?" The old woman replied, No. "Father." The man my age with the glasses clung harder to the bar in the opposite corner and shook his head. He was sweat-soaked from fear. The Brit looked to me, but it was obvious the boy and I weren't related. I said, "His family must be in this building somewhere. They probably let him play outside with the other kids and ride the elevator alone." I felt my heart swell with hope. They'll miss him. Sooner than any of us will be missed, and his family will wonder where their child is. He's not on the playground outside, and he's not with any of his friends. "Yeah," the Brit breathed. The 2 teen boys nodded and laughed with nearly explosive relief. "Come on," I said to the boy, who still stood frozen by the edge. We'd stopped swinging as much, and it was getting safer to move. Tears were running down his face. His lip was trembling, and he'd peed his pants. "It's fine. Come on." I clutched the bar and held out my other hand as far as fear would allow. Even if he was scared of strangers, I would grab him by the wrist if I could. The rightmost elevator, on the side we couldn't see, chose that moment to kick into life. The car shook. The boy sailed out of sight. Swallowed up by darkness without a single sound, he was gone, just like that. We didn't react. We didn't even scream. None of us moved for at least 30 seconds. I stared at the place where he'd been, hoping I just hallucinated the event. Nope. The Brit swallowed loudly and finally said, "We're only on the 6th floor. It's survivable." But it wasn't. We knew. 6 floors down to sheer concrete and metal. There was no way. A child. There were no more attempts to solve our situation after that. We sat in silence. We cried without sobbing. We stared at the floor without words. An hour passed, then 2. My sorrow and terror solidified into something darker and sharper, and I found myself staring at the still-lit buttons we'd pressed on the way in. 4, 5, 7, 11, and 15. 5 numbers. When I finally broke the silence, my voice was colder and harsher than I'd ever heard it. "What floors are you all from?" Noticing the dangerous tone in my voice, the Brit responded slowly. 15. He and I looked to the old woman. She replied sadly, 5. The three of us looked at the two teenage boys. Nervously, they replied together, 7. And I pressed 4, I said flatly, letting the words spill out of me as the 5 of us looked at the sweat-soaked man with glasses. Which leaves 11. Huddled in the corner yet still clutching the bar, he nodded. El 11º piso. Sí. He paused, thinking of the words. 11. That's all of us. Why? I think I knew what was happening even as I was speaking. That's not all of us. The tears were running down my face again, but not because I was afraid. The anger rose with each word. That's all the floors, yes, but that's not all of us. What floor was he going to? What floor did that boy live on? I think the man with the glasses realized it too. He looked to each of us in turn, finding us a united community of fury. He half smiled, hoping to lie, but his smile fell as we realized he already knew. He tilted his head and opened his mouth as if to bargain or plead for his life, but that too faded as we began to creep towards him across the unstable floor. He clung to the bar for dear life as we grabbed at him, but the words he finally chose were not about that. He screamed something in Spanish. Granted, the Brit replied, his jaw trembling with anger and sorrow. His strength was important to the process, but it was my kick that finally sent the man with glasses over the edge into the darkness. As before, there were no screams. There wasn't so much as a thud. With justice served, the energy went out of us like a deflating balloon. We sat in silence once more. The only words exchanged were between me and the Brit. I asked, "What did he say? What did you grant?" The Brit looked at each of us to confirm our agreement before settling his gaze on me. He said, "Don't tell them what I did. I don't want her to know what I did." We were rescued 7 hours later. When they asked us what happened, we all looked at each other and told the same story. Father and son had fallen together accidentally. Several family members clutched the new widow tight, but she held it together. I don't know why she chose me. As the police finished taking statements, the bodies were being carted out, and we were all turning to leave. A hand fell on my shoulder. "You, American," the widow said as I turned around to face two piercing eyes surrounded by halos of grief. "Is that what happened? Did he die trying to save our boy? Was he a hero?" I couldn't think. Maybe I said, it was all an accident, but he was no hero. He was a pathetic coward who was too afraid to even just help to save his son's life. Maybe I said, I don't know. I was too scared to look. Maybe I said, no, we murdered him for sitting by and watching his son die. Maybe I said, yes, he was a hero, a brave man. I'm embarrassed I couldn't match his courage. I said one of these things. I honestly can't remember which. Even at that moment, I didn't know which of the screaming phrases in my brain actually left my mouth. The only image that survived the stress of the moment is of her nodding lightly and letting me go. And I could only wait paralyzed for her to hug me, cry suddenly, nod in agreement, or shout for the police. Instead of any of those reactions, all she said was, "I understand." And I was left to wonder for the rest of my life which one I told her. If you made it this far, I hope you'll follow me on Twitter at KingSpookCreepy.